Imagine trying to stop a river that has no water. It is made of sand, driven by wind, moving slowly but relentlessly across one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Roads disappear beneath it. Young plants are buried. Oases sit at its edge like islands waiting to be swallowed. And yet, around China's Taklimakan Desert, something extraordinary has happened. After more than 4 decades of work, a 3,046-kilometer sand-blocking green belt was completed around the desert on November 28, 2024. But here is the part that matters. China did not solve the desert problem by simply planting millions of trees. It first had to solve a much more difficult question. How do you make the sand stop moving?
That was the real problem. Not planting trees, stopping the sand.
The Taklimakan covers roughly 337,600 square kilometers inside Xinjiang's Tarim Basin. It is China's largest desert and one of the world's largest shifting sand deserts. At its edges, enormous dunes can migrate under the pressure of wind, constantly threatening roads, settlements, farmland, and the fragile green oases that surround the basin. From the air, the landscape looks almost motionless. At ground level, it is anything but. Wind lifts grains from the surface, carries them forward, and drops them again. One dune changes shape while another advances behind it. A road can be cleared today and buried again tomorrow. Plant a tree directly into that moving surface, and the desert has several ways to defeat it.
The enemy isn't just drought, it's movement. It's movement.
Sand can bury the trunk. Wind can expose the roots. Dryness can finish what the sand began. That is why the first breakthrough was not a forest. It was a grid. Long before the full ring around the Taklimakan existed, another piece of the puzzle was being solved beside a railway. Rail lines crossing northern China's drylands faced a brutally practical problem. Sand did not need to destroy the railway. It only needed to cover it. A track buried beneath a moving dune is useless, no matter how strong the steel beneath it may be.
The solution looked almost too simple. Straw.
Researchers began testing different ways to stabilize the surface. The breakthrough came from an object that looked almost embarrassingly ordinary: straw. Placed in a grid across the sand, the straw created thousands of tiny pockets where the wind lost some of its strength. Instead of allowing loose grains to travel freely across a smooth surface, the grid interrupted that movement again and again. This was not a wall. It was friction multiplied across an entire landscape. And that idea reveals something important about engineering. The solution did not have to be bigger than the problem. It had to interact with the problem at exactly the right scale. One piece of straw could do almost nothing. Thousands arranged correctly could change the behavior of the surface. The method was developed through decades of sand control work, and official Chinese sources identify grass or straw grids, drought-resistant vegetation, and other protective measures as part of the broader strategy around the Taklimakan. Once this method was refined, it offered something far more valuable than a temporary barrier. It bought time. Time for moisture to remain, time for organic material to accumulate, time for hardy plants to establish roots, time for a landscape to become less vulnerable. This is the hidden logic behind many successful desert restoration projects. First stabilize the surface, then establish vegetation, then manage water, not the other way around. The order matters because a desert is not merely a place where plants lack water. It is a system of wind, sand, heat, and limited moisture. Change one part without understanding the others, and the entire project can fail. China gradually turned that lesson into a much larger engineering system. By the end of 2023, a 761-kilometer green barrier had already been established around the Taklimakan, connecting protective belts and oasis zones. Only about 285 kilometers remained. On November 28, 2024, that final gap was closed. The new barrier is not a single continuous forest. It is a defensive landscape made from different layers of protection, including drought-tolerant vegetation and sand control measures adapted to local conditions. And that distinction is crucial, because the goal is not to transform every square kilometer of desert into woodland. The goal is to protect the places where people already live: roads, farmland, cities, oases, infrastructure. The green belt acts more like a shield than a conventional forest. But even after the sand is controlled, another enemy remains almost invisible: water. A tree is not simply a piece of green scenery, it is a biological pump. Every leaf can move water from the ground into the atmosphere. In a wet climate, that is part of the normal water cycle. In an extremely dry environment, every drop has a cost. This creates one of the most uncomfortable truths about greening deserts. More vegetation is not automatically better.
And this is where greening the desert gets complicated. Every plant has a water bill.
If the wrong plants are introduced, or if too many plants are concentrated in an area with limited groundwater, restoration can become unsustainable. Vegetation may initially look like success, while the underlying water balance moves in the opposite direction. That is why serious desert restoration increasingly depends on choosing plants that can survive with very little water, positioning them carefully, and designing irrigation around actual ecological limits. The objective is not maximum greenery, it is maximum stability per drop. The same principle explains why a successful green belt should never be judged simply by the number of seedlings planted. 1,000,000 dead trees are not a forest. 1,000 surviving native trees can matter more than 1,000,000 planted for a photograph. The difficult part is not putting plants into the ground. The difficult part is creating conditions in which those plants can survive. That requires understanding wind, understanding soil, understanding groundwater, understanding species, understanding local communities, and understanding time. Because the desert operates on a different clock. A road can be built in months. A plantation can be established in a season. But a stable ecosystem may take years or decades to develop.
The desert's greatest enemy may also be one of its most useful resources: sunlight.
And this is where another unlikely technology enters the story: solar power. Across parts of China's arid regions, huge photovoltaic installations now occupy land that receives intense sunlight for much of the year. At first, the relationship seems obvious: desert plus sunshine equals electricity. But the panels can also change the environment beneath them. They create shade, they alter wind exposure, they can reduce the direct heating of the ground. And when vegetation or other land uses are carefully integrated with the solar infrastructure, a single piece of land can potentially serve several purposes, at once producing electricity, supporting vegetation, and reducing some of the stresses that make arid land restoration so difficult. Chinese reporting on the Taklimakan's protective system specifically identifies photovoltaic power stations among the methods being integrated into desert edge protection. The important word is carefully. A panel does not magically create an ecosystem. A solar field is not automatically a desert restoration project. The lesson is the same as before.
But sometimes restoration doesn't begin with planting anything. Sometimes the forest is already there.
Technology works when it is designed around the physics of the environment. And China is not the only place where that lesson has emerged. Travel west across the deserts of Africa, and the story changes dramatically. For years, the popular image of the Great Green Wall was simple: plant a giant line of trees across the Sahel and stop desertification. The reality turned out to be far more complicated. Trees planted without enough water can die. Projects imposed without local participation can struggle. A single straight wall does not match the way ecosystems, farms, and rainfall actually work. So the idea evolved. Instead of thinking only about one continuous wall, restoration efforts increasingly focus on mosaics of trees, shrubs, grasslands, farms, and naturally regenerating vegetation. That shift matters because restoration is not always about creating something new. Sometimes it is about recovering what is already there. For years, Australian agronomist Tony Rinaudo tried to plant trees in dry landscapes, and watched many of them fail. Then he noticed something astonishing. The forest had not completely disappeared. It was still alive beneath the ground. Old roots and living stumps remained hidden under fields and dry soil. Instead of importing more trees, farmers could protect the natural regeneration already waiting there. The method became known as farmer-managed natural regeneration. The idea was almost the opposite of conventional reforestation. Do less. Protect what survives. Prune carefully. Allow native vegetation to return. And let local farmers become part of the restoration system rather than treating them as spectators. That story changes the meaning of green. Green does not always mean a dense forest. Sometimes it means a field with scattered native trees. Sometimes it means shrubs stabilizing the soil. Sometimes it means grass returning after years of degradation. And sometimes the greatest ecological achievement is not adding something new, but allowing something ancient to recover. Across the world, communities facing degraded land are confronting variations of the same equation. Rain is limited. Wind is powerful. Soils are fragile. Budgets are finite. People still need food. Infrastructure still has to function. And restoration has to compete with every other demand placed on the landscape. That is why the most successful projects often look less dramatic up close than people expect. They may contain fewer trees, more shrubs, more grasses, more bare ground, more carefully protected patches, more monitoring, more patience. From the ground, that can look less like a miracle and more like maintenance. But perhaps that is exactly what successful restoration really is. Not one spectacular moment. A system that keeps working after the cameras leave. And this brings us back to the original question. Can humans really turn a deadly desert into a green oasis? Sometimes, in carefully selected places, we can make the edge of a desert more stable, more productive, and more capable of supporting life. But the deeper achievement is different. We can learn where not to plant, where not to waste water, where native vegetation is already waiting, where engineering can reduce the pressure, and where nature should be allowed to do most of the work. That is a much harder story than simply planting trees, but it is also a much more powerful one. Look again at the Taklimakan. The 3046-kilometer perimeter is enormous, but the achievement is not that the desert has vanished. It is that a protective system now follows its edge, helping shield vulnerable regions from drifting sand. Chinese authorities now describe the post-2024 phase as strengthening and expanding the existing belt rather than treating completion as the end of the work. That may be the most important lesson of all. A desert cannot be defeated once. It has to be managed continuously.
The desert is still here, and that is the point. The goal was never to erase it.
And the future may make that management even more precise. Satellites can track vegetation from space. Drones can survey terrain that is difficult for people to reach. Sensors can monitor soil moisture. Artificial intelligence can compare enormous areas of land and identify where restoration is succeeding or failing. Researchers are also studying ways to improve water retention and help plants survive extreme conditions. But technology will not change the basic rule. Every successful system must respect the limits of the environment, because the desert does not care how impressive the project looks from above. It responds to wind, to water, to temperature, to roots, to time. And perhaps that is why the most fascinating part of this story is not the wall of green itself. It is the shift in human thinking behind it. At first, the instinct was simple: plant more trees. Then came the harder realization: stop the sand, use the right species, measure the water, work with local ecosystems, adapt. And sometimes, instead of forcing nature to become something else, help it recover what was already there. Which leaves us with a fundamental question. Is the future of dryland restoration built with mega engineering, sensors, and solar panels? Or is it unlocked simply by getting out of the way and letting ancient root systems recover on their own? Tell me where you stand in the comments. The lesson from the Taklimakan, from the Sahel, and from restoration projects around the world is surprisingly consistent. You do not win against a harsh environment by overpowering it. You win by understanding the rules it has followed for thousands of years.
Maybe the future isn't about turning deserts into forests. Maybe it's about learning where life can return and helping it stay.
The future of desert restoration may not be a world where every desert becomes green. It may be something far more realistic, a world where roads stay open, oases survive, farmland remains productive, native vegetation returns, and the boundary between sand and civilization becomes a little more secure. The green belt around the Taklimakan is therefore more than a line of plants. It is a giant experiment in whether engineering, ecology, and human patience can work together. The sand is still there, the desert is still there, and the challenge is not over. But for the first time, the question is no longer simply how to survive the desert. It is how to understand it well enough to live beside it.